going to be starting chapter 2, trade-offs and trade. So do you remember when we talked about the principles of economics before, and we talked about what opportunity cost meant? Do you guys remember what opportunity cost meant? Yeah.
It's the value of the next best alternative.
Right, it's the value of the next best alternative. So remember we talked about it in the context of if I spend more time studying, then I'm giving up my fun time that maybe I can go see a movie with a friend. Or if I decide to go to college instead of going to work right after high school, then I'm giving up the value of tuition and the time spent in college. So we talked about it in terms of time, and we talked about it in terms of like the monetary value of things. But actually we can start talking about opportunity and cost in terms of more macro principles. Like if I am the leader of a country and I decide to produce one good, how much of the other good am I giving up producing because of that? So we're going to talk about that in the context of trade. We're going to introduce a concept called comparative advantage, and we're also going to talk about the production possibilities curve. Okay? So first, the production possibilities frontier or curve, either PPC or PPF, it's the same thing if you see it. It's a diagram that basically shows you the options of two goods that you can produce, right? The possibilities that a country can produce in terms of two goods, okay? And the curve shows in itself the two goods that you can produce if you're using all of your resources efficiently and if you're producing at full employment, okay? So you can think of it as the maximum amount that a country can produce with its given resources, okay? And we use the PPF to answer these sorts of questions. How much can a country produce? Okay, should it produce one thing over the other? What's it going to cost if we change up what we're producing? Okay, and does it make sense to import a good from somewhere else if we can produce it more of a good? Okay, so we're going to talk about those things. Okay. So first, this is the PPF line. Okay, so we see that it's between two goods, okay, and it's always going to be like that, between two goods that a country can produce. So we're going to assume in this country, okay, that we can only produce computers and t-shirts, okay, and if we put all of our production capacity, all of our labor, all of our resources into producing computers, then we can produce 30 computers if we produce absolutely no t-shirts. On the other side, if we want to produce only t-shirts, absolutely no computers, then we can produce 40 t-shirts given our resources, okay? So that's what this line represents. All the different combinations and possibilities of the computers and t-shirts that we can produce if we're producing to our full extent, okay? And this just shows the different possibilities. If we examine a point under the curve, okay, we can produce at points under the curve, but it's not the most efficient use of resources, okay? We can produce more of either good if we chose to, so it's not the most efficient use of resources, right? And remember, in economics, more is always better, okay? So we don't want to just stop producing at point C, right? We would want to move either to this point or up to this point, right? Or even like any of these other points, as long as we're like at the most efficient use of resources. Alternatively, the points above the curve are something that we can't produce by ourselves, okay? We don't have the given resources, whether it be labor or capital, whatever it is. We can't produce above this line, okay? And as I said, all the points exactly on the curve are both feasible and efficient, okay? So in a world without trade, okay, our production is equal to our consumption. The point that we produce at is exactly what we're consuming. So say that we decide to produce 20 t-shirts and 15 computers, that's exactly what we're consuming. Okay, but we're gonna see a little bit later that in a world with trade, we still can only produce on the line, right? We can't produce above the line without growth, but we may be able to consume above the production line. Okay. Now remember we talked of opportunity cost in terms of both time and monetary value. But you can think of opportunity cost in terms of, as I said, what you're having to give up in terms of production. Okay? So again, say that I want to produce more shirts, right? What am I having to give up?
Computers.
Yeah, I'm having to give up more computers in order to produce more shirts. Okay? And you can compute that opportunity cost in terms of the other good. Okay? So the way that you compute the opportunity cost is, say that I want to find the opportunity cost of each t-shirt. Okay? So I look at, if I put all of my production capacity into computers, right, the amount that I'm giving up over the amount that I could get if I produce only t-shirts. Okay? So again, I'm going to repeat that. In order to calculate the opportunity cost of each t-shirt, okay, in the numerator, I'm looking at the amount of computers that I could get in full production capacity towards computers over the denominator, what I would have to give up in terms of the full production capacity of t-shirts. Okay? So it would be 30 over 40, 3 over 4. So to produce each t-shirt, I'm having to give up 3/4 of a computer. Okay? That's one way to do it. Another way to think about it is, right, the slope of this line. Now, do you guys remember how to calculate what the slope of a line is? Remember, it's rise over run. Okay, right? The change in slope is the change in rise over the change in run. Okay? The opportunity cost is the same thing, right? It's the amount that I'm having to give up of computers in order to get this many more t-shirts. Okay? So we can think of this line, this opportunity cost, the slope of this line as the opportunity cost. Okay? So if I want to calculate the opportunity cost of t-shirts, okay, I just find the slope of this line. Okay? And again, you can even, like, you just pick 2 points. So I can pick this point and this point. Rise, 30, over run, 40. And again, we get 3 over 4. Okay? Any questions up to this point? Okay. Good. So then let's try to practice it by yourselves. So just in your notebook in front of you, try to see if you can calculate the opportunity cost of one textbook. So take a minute to do that. The opportunity cost of each textbook. Yeah, do you have the answer?
It's A.
A, 2 pencils. How did you get 2 pencils?
10 divided by 5.
Okay, exactly. So you took the 10 pencils, right, that you could have at full production capacity of pencils, right, over the 5 textbooks, right, that you have. So basically what you're giving up, 10 pencils, over the 5 textbooks that you're getting, okay? And exactly, so you end up with 2 pencils, okay? So if you want to produce 1 more textbook, you're giving up 2 pencils, right? That's the value of the next best alternative, okay? Does anybody have any questions as to how to get 2 pencils? Awesome. Okay. So if you remember, I said that we can't on our own produce at a point above the production possibilities curve, okay? Well, in order to produce above the production possibilities curve, we have to shift it up, okay? And that's what we call economic growth, is if we can shift up our production possibilities curve so that we can produce more, okay? And then there's only 2 ways to do this, okay? There's the increase in the factors of production, okay, which remember we talked about before. They're land, labor, and capital, right? Human capital and physical capital, okay? Or investment in better technology, okay? So it would basically allow a country to produce the two goods more efficiently, and therefore being able to produce more of them, okay? And that leads us to the final thing I want to talk about today, leading into trade, okay? So we have this concept called comparative advantage. Now, if you look here, right, what do you notice about what the United States can produce versus what Mexico can produce? What do we notice? So the US can produce 3 planes, Mexico can produce 2. The US can produce 15 yards of cloth, and Mexico can produce 8. Right, what do we notice there?
US produces more.
The US can produce more, right? So then the question we ask ourselves as economists is, should the US even trade with Mexico if the US can produce more of each good, right? And the answer is absolutely they should, because the US has what we call an absolute advantage, okay, which is just they can produce more of each good, okay? But the opportunity costs between the two countries differ, okay? So if you notice, the opportunity cost of one plane for the US is 5 yards of cloth. Okay, so they have to give up 5 yards of cloth for every plane that they produce. Mexico, on the other hand, only has to give up 4 yards of cloth for every plane that they produce. So in Mexico, it's cheaper to produce planes than it is in the US. Alternatively, for the US, if they want to produce a yard of cloth, it only costs them 1/5 of a plane. For Mexico, if they want to produce 1 yard of cloth, it costs them 1/4 of a plane. So here, the opportunity cost of producing 1 yard of cloth is higher for Mexico, okay? So what's going to happen is the US, right, is going to specialize where they have the lower opportunity cost, the good that is cheaper for them to produce. So they're going to end up producing 1 yard, they're going to end up producing only cloth. Mexico is going to produce in the good in which they have a lower cost, the planes, and they're going to specialize in that. So what's going to happen is the US is going to only produce cloth, okay? They're going to produce 0 planes and 15 yards of cloth, and Mexico is going to produce 2 planes and no cloth, okay? And then they're going to trade, okay? And we're going to see in the experiment that's going to happen in the next class, right, that both countries are going to end up better off, right, after they specialize and then trade. Okay. Now, do you guys have any questions up to this point before we start the in-class activity? Okay, thank you so much.